All right, an introduction video for fairnessfirst.com. The idea is to create a third party for utility purposes. This first one could be called anything, just about. Um, Real democracy, something, doesn't really matter. The idea is to first fix the system, the political system, to enable third parties to be viable and useful and constructive in terms of protecting voters from this obligation to choose between, bad and worse, and instead always have a good choice to vote their real ideology. And we can only accomplish that by fixing the democracy in terms of we have a very old democracy with very old bad habits and not very efficient ways of voting. And yes, so the original democracy had to be people had to write votes on pieces of paper and stick them in boxes in locations. The boxes had to be taken to different places and moved around, and it was all because the world wasn't geographically connected, it was geographically isolated, and people had to vote based on that isolation and in that isolation. And none of that has to be true anymore. Now we don't have to, we're not bound by our geography, and we shouldn't have to vote in a structure that obligates geography to own us, for us to be the property of a state or a town or a community. And more to the point is that in elections, the real spoiler effect is the fact that any third party just ends up diminishing this power of one of the two parties. And in doing that, you end up diminishing the power of something more like you than something opposed to you. So you end up hurting things closer to what you believe in, and you end up helping things that are the worst choice. So by voting third party, you're essentially guaranteeing a vote for essentially your worst possible choice. You'll get the worst possible outcome, for your effort. And it shouldn't be that way, kind of obviously. And it can be fixed by just something as simple as runoff voting or ranked voting. A pretty benign change to the system that creates a huge change in terms of allowing people to exercise, to make a statement, to basically say to the candidates, this is what I really believe and this is what I really want to vote for. And I really don't want to vote for the Democrats if you're going to be this, that, and that. And I don't want to vote for the Republicans if it means I'm voting for a bunch of religious kooks or some other thing. It lets the parties know what you don't like about them. Having the option to first say, this is what I really want, and you're really not what I want. And, in the future, if it's viable to vote against you, I will, when I can vote for something better than you. So anyway, to be able to freely vote for a third party without being a spoiler would be a huge advantage in the system. Just make it so much clearer in terms of what we actually are voting for, what people actually want out of government. It's no longer perverted by the fact that, because one party's for something really stupid, it means that everybody voted for the other guy. They didn't really vote for the other guy. They just voted against the stupid guy. And that's a huge difference. And all of that goes away if we just do this little fix. So the point really is that I wish to design a platform on this idea of fairness, and that lots of policy can be understood by just trying to implement fairness. So in the future, that will be the agenda. So there'll be other subjects and other subjects to which I would opine and argue for certain policy changes. But all of that's irrelevant. So any of you disagree with me on every other subject, the only subject this party would first battle for is the right of third parties to exist, essentially. Their practical utility, because they have none until we fix the system. Until you have the freedom to vote your real mind and for the candidate you really want, there's no freedom at all, really. You're just stuck with, bad and worse. And those aren't good enough choices. Nothing, you wouldn't call it a democracy even. It's so far from being what it should be. So another part to this is the representation part, the idea that we call it a representative democracy, but it's really just a majoritarian dictatorship. You know, the majority in your small community dictates the majority in your, the county level. It's always the same majoritarian election that you're voting in. So you're always losing the same election, no matter how broad you make it. It's always the same election you're losing. In some districts, you'll never win an election because the district is owned by Republicans. They have the majority, and no matter how many times you vote or how long you live, you'll never have a representative that equals your ideology. Your ideology is essentially destroyed. So we have a winner-take-all system that just destroys all notion of anything called representation. The only thing represent is New Jersey is mostly Democrats or New Jersey is mostly Republicans. There's no broader statement made. And that's a huge failing of the system. I don't want to vote for New Jersey. I want to vote for federal policies that implement a fair system for all the states to exist in. I don't want to be voting a self-interest. I want to be voting a national interest. And that's the policy that we need to write. So we need to be taken out of a system that incentivizes selfishness and be put into a system that liberates your sensible right to vote for the right thing, to vote for what's fair. I don't want to kill people in Connecticut to save people in New Jersey. I doesn't mean anything to me. Okay, I'm not part of a team because I live in a state. And I'm not saying that team is better than all the other states, and we should do whatever we can to steal as much federal money and do all of that graft. That has nothing to do with how I understand how the world works and how I want my country to work. And the only way to fix this is to fix it. It has to be changed. The policies have to be changed, or we're never going to have any representation. The Congress and the Senate should look like America. That is, America has lots of crazy people on the left and on the right. And those people should have a voice, but they should have a limited voice. They shouldn't have a blackmail and extortionist voice. The special interest in the party system now is obvious. I mean, it gives the religious kooks way too much power because they own the Republican Party. The Republican Party has to do what they say or they'll move on, okay? They won't vote for them anymore because they don't believe anything else the Republicans believe. They just believe in their God and they want their religion imposed on other people. And that's all they want out of the Republican Party. And you could say makes the same argument for the special interests of some of the labor unions, the government employees, different things where the Liberal Party gives them anything they want because they can't afford to lose their votes. So they just keep feeding them and giving them every single thing they want through extortion. And that's really how the political system works now, is that if any group of people, if you can get 4 million people or so to belong to your organization, then you have extortion power. Then you can force the political parties to bend to your wishes. And that's the system we exist in, a two-party system just made out of special interests. A bunch of people forcing their selfish agenda on an entire nation. And all of us might have that impulse. All of us might want to wish that we can control things, even though we're a minority. We get to run the gears and pull the levers. But I think all the decent people know that's not how the system should work. I shouldn't be competing with you to engineer and chicanerize the system so I can manipulate and cheat, where I can take advantages that I didn't really earn. And that would be the whole principle here of the idea of fairness, is understanding that anything we get out of our lives should be earned, and that the government should be doing its only role it should be really playing is to incentivize good behavior and de-incentivize bad behavior, to use whatever carrots and whatever little whips it has in the most constructive way possible. And it's not going to be that way when we're whipping each other, when we're sitting here trying to steal each other's carrots, when the whole government is just based on what's my special interest, what's my personal interest. If everybody's thinking that way, you're not going to build a nation that's worth living in. And that's why we live in one that's barely worth living in. Barely a cut above the worst it could be. So it really needs policy change, and the only way to get it is to extort the two-party system. So what a third party needs to do is gain enough support for the idea of the freedom for there to exist third parties in a practical way, in a useful way. Give them useful power. And the only way they can get it is they're going to have to extort it out of the existing two parties. They're the ones that have control, and they're going to have to be persuaded that it's in their own interest to placate this group of people, this block of votes. So if a third party can get 4, 5, or 6 million people to vote its way, Ralph Nader already demonstrated how the third party has the power. He just used it very badly. He had the power to force the Democrats to do some things, to do some reforming, and instead of extorting them for that power, he didn't do what he should have done, which is told Al Gore, make me some good promises and you can have my 5 million votes. And instead he buried his 5 million votes in the ground, shot them into the ground like a meteor, just ruined them, destroyed all their power, and allowed George Bush to be president of the United States. It's that simple. Ralph Nader made it happen. His good deed went thoroughly punished. We all had to be punished by it. So instead of the will of the people being acted on, we had a president who really wasn't elected by the will of the people. He was elected by a sham fact that the Nader voters who would have voted for Gore ended up just being spoilers. They ended up voting for George Bush. So we already seen it happen. We already know it exists as a terribly destructive element of politics. Could have happened in the Ross Perot situation. You get the two parties competing with each other, and you can have 60% of the votes caught up in these two parties competing, and then the 40%er gets to win. I mean, it's really invidious and insidious, and reasonable people should be for fixing it. And if we get those 4 million people, then we can tell the two parties to start talking about introducing legislation to fix this. At least promising to introduce the legislation, and then we can see how people vote, and then how those candidates vote will be on the record, and then we'll all know that these are the guys that are for fixing the system, these guys against it, and so that'll be a powerful piece of information. So again, if Ralph Nader would have done that, would have just said to Al Gore, give me a promise that you're going to have legislation introduced in the Congress to create instant runoff voting, to give us voting rights, third-party voting rights, to fix this problem. You could have got it. Could have got the promise to at least have the legislation introduced. And it would have been a huge advance in our political system, a huge step forward. So it can be done. It doesn't take a miraculous amount of support. It doesn't take winning over the majority. It just takes getting enough people who are committed, who will say, look, no matter who I make the deal with, the Republicans or the Democrats, doesn't matter who makes the deal. If they make the deal, we all vote that way. And as long as we do that one time, that hold our nose and do what we have to do to get this one issue fixed, then we're free for the rest of our lives. Then your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren and the rest of our prodigy in this planet will sit there and have a freedom that we don't have because we held our nose and fought for it. And that's all it's going to take. And it's vital. So, I mean, all the third parties with their agenda, they just got to put away the agenda stuff, and all those people who are interested in third parties and interested in, are passionate about something, they have to understand that their passion is wasted. Until we have a real representative democracy, your passion is useless. You can't fight City Hall that way. You have to fight it by fixing it. The system's broken, and that's why you're losing. Okay, and you'll win in a system that allows you to win. All right, the current system doesn't allow it to happen. There's too many forces against you. There's too much crooked shenanigans, okay, blowing against you. And until you get rid of that, you have no hope. We have to have a fair system. You have to make the fair system, and it's not going to just happen on its own. You got to force it, and so that's what needs to take place. I'll lend my voice if somebody else wants to do this better, but somebody's got to start it. Somebody's got to do something to make it known that this is what this has to be the first cause of a third party. So I have that. I have a little website, Fairness First, with a one st .com. I've written a tiny little paragraph here. The first job of a third party is to fight for political right for third parties to practically function. So, blah, 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 blah. Just a quick outline. Yeah, it needs a lot more explanations because people really don't know what the spoiler effect is. They don't know what instant runoff voting is. All this stuff needs to be explained. And I'll get to that eventually. And so this video is just to start, just a statement that I am interested. If you're interested, let me know. I don't think, but you can leave a comment, okay? So that would be the way to do it. Just leave a comment, and it'll get to me eventually. And let's see if we can do something to fix this mess, because it's going to stay just horrible until we fix it. It's going to be all about special interests and group dynamics and criminals finding comfort with criminals is all you really have now. The minorities that are ineffectual because they can't compromise. They can't sit there and say, I'm for one man's freedom, but I'm not for that person's freedom or that person. They can't accept a huge compromise. And that's understandable. There's lots of people just totally disenfranchised because they just can't. They can't, with any kind of honesty, sit there and say, I'll accept being part of a cabal of criminals. I don't mind because all the criminals are fighting the Nazis. It's okay that they're almost worse than Nazis, the guys I'm fighting with. It's that's too much, too onerous, And so by their own integrity is in their way, and the only way that integrity is going to be liberated and your people's real passions are ever going to be revealed in the world and seen on the floor of the House of Representatives until we fix this system, because this system just guarantees you're going to vote for a liar, somebody who's way compromised all over the place, who've sold their soul, sold the principles, sold everything. You're not going to get honest government, decent government, not going to get real human government. You're going to get a machine, a political machine, okay, that's just going to lie and cheat and steal wherever it can. And if you want something more honest, and you want something with some more integrity, you're going to have to make it happen. And frankly, there's only one way it's going to happen. It has to happen through this process. You have to fight City Hall from inside of City Hall. You can't do it, burning it down. You can't do it with sticks and stones. You can't do it with, interesting rhetoric about how much they stink or smell. You have to do something practical. And the practical step is to understand you have to fix the system with the instruments that exist. And so you have to manipulate those instruments. You have to use your power, in this constructive way, not in a bunch of destructive ways. It's like building something rather than tearing it down. Tearing it down is really easy, but it doesn't get you anywhere. The hard part is building it. The hard part is making something worth having, not just tearing down stuff that isn't. That's the real work. So that's probably enough of an opening statement, and just so I have a video, it'll be a real intro video instead of the one that exists. And I'll do put whatever energy I can into this process, into this effort, and I haven't in the past been able to generate any kind of interest or support, but there's just no point in not trying at all, so I'm going to make some effort, and this is part of that some effort and such. So I think that's enough of a video. So updates and such, I'll provide more detail and attempt to do more writing and such.